Now, have you ever wondered what the rarest Xeno game is? Well, neither have I until today. It got me thinking and I was curious, and the answer may seem obvious at first, but if you really think about it, this might actually surprise you. But I wanted to answer that question and figure what the rarest Xeno game is. There's not a whole lot of them, so it's a bit easier to figure this out. But the first factor we have to look into is game sales, since that relatively is indicative of which games sold the most and least. Now keep in mind, these are not 100% accurate or really even are 100% proof of, oh, the game that sold the least is obviously the rarest. That's not typically the case. And as for Gears and Saga, the sales numbers are not really up to date at all, since these games came out way back at the beginning of the century, and the figures haven't been updated for some time now, since they are no longer being produced and sold, and not too many people are buying them. So the sales figures that I found for them are pretty close to what they actually did sell. And I know the amount of sales that a game made compared to how many copies were produced is not really a correlation either. For example, Xenogears could have made 1 million copies but only sold 500,000 of them. So it's kind of tough, and I didn't really find anything about the copies made, so I kind of just have to go off of the sales for all of these. But however, the Xenoblade figures are very up to date as of the beginning of this year, so you shouldn't have any issue with that. Now, my sources, it was very difficult to find the primary main source of these sales, but my sources are Fandom and GameFAQs. I know those aren't the most reliable. There's been some controversy with Fandom within the past year or so, and this GameFAQs article that I found the sales for Saga for are from 10 years ago. So there's going to be a bit of margin of error. Now scratch everything I just said, because I found even more up-to-date numbers for Xenogears and Xenosaga. These numbers are as of March of this year, so this is very recent, even more recent than Xenoblade. But Xenogears has sold 1.2 million, which makes sense since it was a very popular game at its time of release. Going on to Xenosaga, Xenosaga 1 has sold 1 million copies and is the only game in the series to do so. Xenosaga 2 went on to sell 280 plus copies as of this year, so a big decline from Xenosaga 1, which is understandable. And then Xenosaga 3 started to recover that with 343,000. Now, for a long time, Xenosaga 3 did sell less than Xenosaga 2, but I'm sure with the recent insurgence of Xenosaga interest within the past couple years, thanks to Xenoblade, Xenosaga 3 sales have gone up a little bit more, considering it is the most highly regarded game in the series. It makes sense that would sell a bit more, if not by much. Before this, with that 10-year-old GameFAQs forum that I mentioned, Xenosaga 2 or Xenosaga 3 sold around 122,000. So it was boosted up a bit, but not by much. It now is higher than Xenosaga 2, which it was not before. Now, these Xenoblade numbers are up to date as of December 31st of last year. So this is very, very up to date and very recent. I don't think numbers have changed that much since then. Maybe for Xenoblade 3, since Future Redeemed did released, that was kind of a big deal. That may have brought more people in. But as of the beginning of this year, the numbers for all For all versions of Xenoblade 1, it has sold around 2.5 million copies. Just DE alone sold 1.3, so that's really not that bad. It's the only version that sold over a million copies. 3D sold 430,000 and the OG version sold 750. So Xenoblade 1 did pretty well. Xenoblade 2 with Torna included, we don't really know the overseas sales numbers for Torna, at least according to this chart, but Xenoblade 2 sold around 2.1 million, and it actually hit 2 million recently as of last year. And then Xenoblade X barely even hit 700,000. That's sad to see. And then Xenoblade 3 is up at 1.3 million sales as of December 31st of last year. So Xenoblade has been selling very well, each game hitting over a million copies. And in the case of Xenoblade 2, hitting over 2 million copies, being the best selling game in the entire Xeno franchise. I think Xenoblade 2 outsold the entirety of Xenosaga, which is kind of funny. Now, just by the sales figures alone, it looks like Xenosaga 2 has sold the least amount of copies. Therefore, that means it is the rarest, right? Well, no, there are still a couple of factors to look at here. Now that we have all the sales figures here and we can see just from that alone relatively how well the game sold, let's look at how much the games sell for today. Because back then, disregarding inflation and retail price, games, specifically Saga and Gears, so we're not going to be looking at Xenoblade for any of this, as we can still get all of the Xenoblade games nowadays on modern consoles, except Xenoblade X as of a couple months ago because the eShop shut down. It's still relatively easy to get a physical copy of Xenoblade X, and then you can still get all three Xenoblade games digitally or physically on the eShop or in stores that are still being sold. So we're just going to be looking at prices for Xenogears and Xenosaga, and since those games are not being printed anymore and are no longer in circulation, they're obviously going to go for a much higher price. So let's look at those real quick. Now, for actually buying these games, I'm going to be looking at Amazon and eBay, since those are typically the two main spots that people would buy them from, and they're just the most reliable sources. Now, surprisingly, both of them have relatively even prices. For the games, I'm going to be looking at basically brand new, either renewed, brand new, just near mint condition, so you can get like the full value of it, and it's going to be as close as possible to what you would buy if you were to get it today, if it was released today. Because for like the Xenoblade games, you can buy them retail, which they will basically be mint condition since they'll be brand new. They should go into GameStop or something, and the digital is also brand new. So the prices for the Xenoblade games are relatively indicative of their value, so they're all $60, which is the standard for today. But looking back at Gears and Saga, for all of the games, I'm going to be looking for the ones that are in the newest and mintest condition, I guess, possible, to kind of just keep it even across the board. And for Xenogears, on Amazon and eBay, for a renewed or damn near mint condition copy, you can find one for about $250. So that's a bit on the high side, but then again, keep in mind Xenogears did come out way back on the PS1 in 1998, right? So it's been over 20 years since this game came out. So $250 for a pretty much mint condition copy is actually quite reasonable. There are games a lot more recent that go for a lot higher of a price, and that's just because of popularity, and sometimes the scarcity of a game can shoot its price way up, as we will see with Xenosaga 3. But as for Xenogears, $250 is around the price range that I found for a lot of them. Some even go up to $600, but let's be real, no one is paying $600 for any game. All right, I don't care what it is, unless you're a multimillionaire and you're doing it just to flex. No one's paying $600 for that. So 250 seems to be a pretty accurate representation. Well, shit, Saga isn't as easy to figure out as Xenogears is. Naturally, there are going to be many varying prices for the games, especially on eBay. I typically find Amazon to be more reliable since it is a big company who's handling all of this by themselves. So I feel like they would give a more accurate representation of the price. As for eBay, it's a lot of individual private sellers, so they can charge whatever they want for it. And some of these prices are absolutely outrageous. So for Xenosaga 1 on eBay or on Amazon, it goes for around $95, which is not at all as much as I expected. But for eBay, there's a wide range of them, but many of them for a brand new, like a brand new copy of it, brand new condition, is around $150. Obviously, you're gonna find some for less and some for more, but the average is around $150. So it's really not all that bad. It's a lot easier to get than Xenogears, that is, which makes sense since it is a lot more recent than Xenogears. And for Xenosaga 2, I was actually surprised at how much higher this was than I expected it to be. I think I bought my copy of Saga 2 at around like I think I got it for like $15, $15 to $30, somewhere around there. It was very cheap. It was nothing. But according to eBay as well as Amazon, the price is around $100 for a brand new copy of Saga 2, which is relatively reasonable, and it makes sense it would be less than Saga 1, considering Saga 2 was received a lot worse than Saga 1 was, and there were a lot less copies than Xenosaga 1. So it kind of makes sense that why it would be this low, even though that copies comment doesn't really make sense because less copies would mean higher price. But Xenosaga 2's reputation isn't that great, so it's not that much less than Saga 1. But this Saga 3 is a completely different monster. This one was so tedious and hard to find like a range for it, or at least like a pretty reasonable price. And as you'd expect, Saga 3 is by far the most expensive out of all of these, with Amazon listing it at $400. Okay, this is the one instance where eBay is actually selling it less than that. $400 for Amazon, and then eBay, of course, it's Xenosaga 3. I don't really need to explain, you know, the ranges here, but Xenosaga 3 was printed less than Saga 2, which was already printed less than Saga 1. So by far, Xenosaga 3 was printed the least, which would make it the rarest, but we're not done yet. Saga 3 is a massive range. It has the highest range difference out of all of these. You can find some as cheap as $100 or as expensive as 1.6K, all right? The range is absurd, but relatively the range I found and the most consistent was around $330 to $350, or like $350 to $400 for a brand new black box copy. And if you wanted greatest hits, that would be around $100 less. So by far, Xenosaga 3 is the most expensive out of all of these games, with Xenosaga 1 being tied with Gears and then Saga 2 at the bottom, as you might expect. So this leaves the battle at a tie between Xenosaga 2 and Xenosaga 3. Xenosaga 2 has the lower sales numbers as of this year, and Xenosaga 3 had surpassed that. But before that, Xenosaga 3 kept relatively consistently lower than Saga 2, and Saga 3 also goes for a lot higher when trying to buy a physical copy online, since there were less copies sold, and Saga 3 is the highest regarded game in the Saga trilogy, so it makes sense it would cost the most. So that leaves us to wonder, I mean, Saga 3 is the rarest Xeno game, since not only did it sell the least amount, it also goes for the most. But we're actually quite not done yet. There's a couple of games that we haven't looked at yet, and that is the Japan-only games, Xenosaga 1 and 2 for the DS and Xenosaga Freaks. Now, naturally, as these games were only sold in Japan, they would obviously be the lowest selling games in the entire series out of Saga, Gears, and Blade. Now, as for Xenosaga Freaks, it sold around 200 or 25,000 copies. Not bad, kind of where you'd expect considering a Japan-only side game for Xenosaga, which already wasn't that big of a series to begin with in the grand scheme of JRPGs. So this is relatively a pretty consistent number. And then Xenosaga 1 and 2 for the DS sold around 38,000 copies. So these aren't really that too far off each other, and it would make sense that Saga 1 and 2 collection would sell more since they are the base games and not a side game, as well as the DS being a very, very popular console. The DS is the second best selling console of all time, right behind the PS2, which Freaks was on. But considering more people are familiar with Xenosaga 1 and 2, it would make more sense that the re-release would make more money than some offshoot side game. But let's look at how much they actually go for online. Now, for Xenosaga Freaks, it's actually pretty respectable. On eBay as well as Amazon, Xenosaga Freaks, a brand new renewed condition, goes for around $65, which is not really that bad at all. That's actually pretty well. And then as for Xenosaga 1 and 2, the DS version, on eBay, it goes for around $150. So just a bit more than Xenosaga 2, even though it sold way less. I guess the appeal of having Saga 1 and 2 both on the same cartridge is nice. But as for Amazon, I didn't really find anything. I searched for Xenosaga 1 and 2 on the DS, and these are the only two results I got. So I guess there's not really a whole lot of interest for that game. But with everything, with all of this into account, Xenogears, Xenosaga 1, Xenosaga 2, Xenosaga Freaks, Xenosaga 1 and 2, Xenosaga 3, and all 4 Xenoblade games. Which Xeno game is the rarest? And that goes to the side game with the least amount of copies sold throughout the entire series, Xenosaga Freaks. Scrap everything I just said throughout this entire video. There is one more game that I have not mentioned yet, and that is Xenosaga Pied Piper. I'm sure Xenosaga Pied Piper needs no introduction here for the more die-hard fans. But those of y'all who do not know, Xenosaga Pied Piper was a mobile game released back in 2004. It was originally published exclusively for Vodafone devices, and Vodafone is a British multinational telecommunication company, so basically phones created by Vodafone. And then later in 2006, a version was released for NTT Docomo's iMode service. And iMode is a mobile internet service popular in Japan. For many of their different, and there were many phones that used this iMode service that were able to download the game. From some of the early Samsung phones to Nokia's to Motorola, these phones were able to download and play Xenosaga Pied Piper. But as we know now, all of those phones and most likely the internet services from way back at the beginning in the early 2000s are no longer in continuation now. So it is basically impossible to play Xenosaga Pied Piper at all, making it the rarest Xeno game. So sales figures don't matter, units sold does not matter, as this didn't even sell any units as it was a mobile game. It is virtually impossible to play nowadays because the only way to play it is from, first you have to have one of these very old Japanese phones that had the iMode service. Not only that, but you have to have had the phone already have Xenosaga Pied Piper on it, because there'd be no way to download the game through the iMode service anymore. So only very few Xenosaga fans have played Xenosaga Pied Piper, and it is basically impossible to play it nowadays, by default making Xenosaga Pied Piper the rarest Xeno game probably ever to be made in existence. We could get 100 more Xeno games and Pied Piper will probably forever be the rarest game. However, not all hope is lost. In April of this year, Gmode, a Japanese company that specializes in games for Java compatible mobile phones, also the company licensed content for mobile telecommunication operators, as well as being involved in the original equipment manufacturing of mobile phone games. Basically, they license and distribute mobile phone games. In April of this year, they dropped a tweet saying, add the title of the feature phone game you wish to reproduce to this tweet and tag it. So basically, they are asking people to set forth what mobile phone game they basically want to resurrect and redistribute. And the overwhelming majority of the replies are just Xenosaga Pied Piper. Just scroll through this tweet and you will just see Xenosaga Pied Piper back to back to back to back to back. So there is a high chance that Xenosaga Pied Piper could be redistributed. Now, take this with a grain of salt. This isn't confirming that, oh, just because Xenosaga Pied Piper was most voted for means it'll happen. It's just that they're taking this into consideration, and there's a high likelihood, or at least some type of chance at all, that Pied Piper could be redistributed to modern mobile phones, which would be so great, because then everybody would get to play Xenosaga Pied Piper, and it would not only bring more attention to that game and the amazing lore that is in it, it would also bring more attention to Xenosaga as a whole, and therefore the entirety of the Xeno franchise. So hope is looking nice. Xenosaga has been looking bright within the past year or so, ever since April with Future Redeemed, as well as this. So Xenosaga is in a very good spot right now. But to answer the question of this video, what is the rarest Xeno game? That goes to Xenosaga Pied Piper. And that's it. This really was not hard at all to figure out. If you just thought about it for 2 seconds, the obvious answer would be Pied Piper. But I kind of had fun researching into all the sales numbers and how much the games are going for today and all this and that. So I could have easily said Xenosaga Pied Piper and the video would be over in 4 seconds. But you know, it's cool. I just kind of wanted to build a little suspense for those who don't know about Pied Piper, and it's just interesting content to watch. So, and it's fun to make, so why not? Yeah, that was it. Xenoblade X video still coming. Haven't abandoned that. But yeah, that's really about it. So see you next mission and play some goddamn Xenoblade.